After 6 consecutive defeats to Bayern Munich, Barcelona finally got their revenge with a thumping 4-1 victory. But if you've watched our tactical deep dives into these sides, you'll know they have a lot of similarities, meaning that the story of this match had to be about gambles. Calculated gambles that paid off for Barcelona. Going ahead so early meant that Barca actually had a lot less of the ball, but their defensive structure is where the game was won and lost. When Bayern Munich had the ball deep, Barcelona had one word on their mind: pressure. This pressure was supported by Barcelona using an extremely high line, a line so high that the back line often used the halfway line as their reference. But being so aggressive with that defensive line meant that the forward players had to be extremely aware and also aggressive in their press to prevent Bayern beginning their build-up play. And they used an interesting modified pressing shape, with Lewandowski dropping slightly deeper onto one of the pivots, either Palhinha or Joshua Kimmich. This was then supported by the wingers, Rafinha and Yamal, both looking to press from out to in so that the centre-backs were under pressure as well. This was one of the advantages this pressing shape provided to Barcelona. The second being that having Lewandowski deeper covering a midfielder meant that their actual midfielders had more room to be picking up their men man-to-man once again to back up that press, whilst having a spare midfielder to look to pick up any men that tried to drift central. All of this meant that Barcelona were able to apply high amounts of pressure to consistently force Bayern Munich backwards, which was their exact goal. What you can see about this shape is that it made Barcelona extremely narrow, which in turn made it difficult for Bayern Munich to play through the center of the pitch. And as a result, they were often filtered into the wide regions when they were beginning their play, which is what Barcelona expected, but as you'll see later on, it also did play into Bayern Munich's hands. But make no mistake, having a line this high meant that they always had to have pressure on the ball, or else Bayern Munich would be able to easily play passes in behind that high line. And what we saw early on were Bayern Munich's eyes lighting up at the prospect of playing longer balls into the space in behind. But rather than building up into a good position to play this pass, they were instead rushing the pass straight from the back line, meaning that it was often inaccurate and Barcelona were able to recover. Company, realizing that Bayern Munich was struggling, looked to adjust 2 players, Guerreiro and Joshua Kimmich. Pretty early on, Kimmich abandoned his defensive midfield position in the build-up because the narrow pressing shape from Barcelona was making it impossible to find him. Instead, we saw him drop into the back line, either centrally or to the left, forming a back 3 with the centre-backs. Now Barcelona had a decision to make. If they maintained their pressing shape, now Bayern Munich had a 3 versus 2 in the build-up phase, making that press from Barcelona much less effective. Not only that, but the spare man would now be Kimmich, who is a lot better on the ball than the centre-backs, so he would actually have the ability to find his wingers running in behind with the first-time pass. So, because Barcelona wanted to maintain that aggressive pressing stance, we saw Lopez be man-oriented on Kimmich, often looking to join him with Yamal remaining higher on Kim. And just by this simple move, Bayern Munich had now opened up a little more room in that compact Barcelona midfield. And here's the second issue for Barcelona. If the wingers are narrow and defending high, who is helping the fullbacks to defend in these wider regions? Well, Bayern looked to take advantage of this question, primarily through Rafa Guerreiro. He was flexible, so he did not always stick wide, and often looked to move into this region to make the most of Rafinha's higher positioning and look to receive. And what we saw a lot of was either him or Olise if Guerreiro was higher, and alternatively Müller if he was moving from the center, now having room away from that Barcelona press. So what happens if you're playing a high line and you give the man on the ball space? This incident is a perfect example, with Guerreiro in space under no pressure, and he finds Kane in an extremely dangerous position, but he takes a poor touch. If that wasn't warning enough, here's incident 2. As Rafinha and Yamal are high pressing the centre-backs, and now it's Müller in that space, and he has time to pick out a pass, this time to Guerreiro out wide. He can then overlap, and eventually the combination play leads to a cross and a goal from Harry Kane, who's just narrowly offside. And let's dig into other ways that Barcelona's shape left them extremely vulnerable in the wider regions. Being so narrow with their front 6 meant that the flanks were completely opened up, and Bayern Munich looked to take advantage of this with constant switches out to their wingers. And one man who was key in allowing these switches to be effective was Thomas Müller, as from his free attacking midfield position, he could often drift into the half space, which would draw in the fullback. Down the right hand side, it was primarily Olise who could then receive, and the hope from Barcelona was by playing such a high line, when the switch came, the winger would still have such a long distance to goal that the Barcelona backline would have the time to recover, and this was true on many occasions. So down that flank, what we soon saw a lot more of was Raf Guerreiro pushing high up into the half space, so that it wasn't the winger having to take on his man and look to go to goal by himself, and instead he would pass the ball into the half space where Guerreiro was looking to make the aggressive run. However, a disadvantage of having a left-footed right back is that he wasn't able to instantly whip in crosses into Harry Kane, meaning that these high positions were slightly less dangerous than they would have been with a right-footed right back. But actually, what was also interesting about this shape was that it made Barcelona extremely dangerous on the attack, as both Yamal and Rafinha were still high up. So when Barcelona won the ball back, they already knew they had dangerous men to hit with the quick ball in behind. And of course, this goal is a perfect example, as though Rafinha is defending deep, Yamal starts high, so he is the outlet pass. And at this stage, Rafinha has time to transition into that narrow position of his behind that high line, producing an outstanding finish. Okay, so a great out-of-possession performance from Barcelona. But what did they do when they were on the ball? Of late, we've seen that Kompany has been adapting his pressing shape, as earlier in the season, Kane was often deep alongside his attacking midfielder, covering the double pivot, whilst both of the wingers would then push in onto the centre-backs, not unlike Barcelona. But of course Ter Stegen is great on the ball, so he would have the potential to find a fullback with a simple pass over the top. And this was a risk that Kompany wasn't willing to take. So instead, what we saw was that Gnabry often stayed deeper as a more traditional left winger, with Kane pressing alongside Olise. And because they couldn't let a midfielder have this much room, it meant that Kimmich was often dragged high up the pitch as well. This still created an issue in this zone, as Balde could potentially receive the ball. But Bayern Munich were already looking to adapt to this, as when Balde was on the ball, Guerreiro was willing to be much more aggressive and back up their press. With Rafinha's fine form this season, that would present a huge issue on the flank. But Upamecano would be moving out wide, and here's where Bayern Munich were often presented with a tricky scenario, as with Lewandowski often looking to show for the ball, it would be up to Kimmich to drop into the backline. And what this meant is that Bayern Munich were somewhat using a back four. But the issue with this is that Kimmich had to know when to push up into the midfield and when to drop into the backline. And this movement in such a crucial zone meant that one wrong move could be taken advantage of by Barcelona. And that's what we saw in the opening goal, as we see Guerreiro high pressing and Upamecano being dragged wide. Kim drops with Lewandowski, creating a gap in that back line, and Kimmich has dropped to make it a 2 versus 2. However, we see that Kimmich is still tight on his man Lopez, though he and Upamecano have actually switched men. So now Kimmich is off balance as the ball comes in, allowing Rafinha to have the 1 versus 1. Bayern Munich were also much less compact between the lines. We saw that Lopez was often able to find room, drifting around between the lines. And this would only be made worse, as Balde was often provided the width on that left-hand side, meaning that Rafinha could also move infield. He and Lopez showed extreme flexibility, but when they stayed on opposite sides, there was the potential for the centre-back to simply pick up the winger. However, we often saw Rafinha drift around the pitch, so that now they often overloaded one of the half spaces, meaning that the centre-back now had 2 men to potentially cover. And this caused issues, as we see in the 2-1 goal, with Furman running in behind after Rafinha had moved deep on the same side. I'm curious to know what you made of this match, so drop it down below. And for the manager tactical score, Flick gets a 7.5, while Kompany gets a 4.5. But also comment your rating down below. I've got the 2 perfect videos for you next, taking a deep dive into both Flick and Kompany's new tactics. Click on screen now.